So today we are checking out Politis. We're gonna take a look at her kit, see how and where to use her, how to gear her, and see if she is worth it to you. Politis is a 5-star fire mage. Her S1 is Call of the Stars. She throws a baby at you with a chance to stun. Her S2 is Astral Guide. It reduces the CR push of the enemy by 50%. When they use a non-attack skill, it will proc Tranquility. Tranquility will hit all enemies, reducing buff duration by 1, and then it will push her CR up by 30%. Then the S3 is Starfall. It simply hits all enemies with a chance to inflict blind and unbuffable. Now that we know her kit, let's dig a little deeper and look at her strengths. Even though the S1 is just a stun, it is 40%, and when you land that stun, it is quite devastating. You can soul burn the S1 for an additional turn, which will then rotate your skills much quicker. Her S2 is only on a 2-turn cooldown. And speaking of the S2, it is in my opinion one of the strongest passives. It cuts the CR boost of your opponent by 50%, which means it's gonna totally mess up a CDOM, an Oxlot, an Amelia, G-Purgus, C-Seria, and Malcharles Flan, but most of all, it will cut an RB's CR boost by 50%, which means that when he reses, instead of 100%, he's only gonna get 50%, which means that you can kill him before you even hear the approaching rune. And of course, if the enemy uses that non-attack skill, it will proc Tranquility. Tranquility will reduce the buff duration by 1, which means that if their first turn hero moves and uses a non-attack skill, your Politis will move and it will reduce the immunity, their immunity set, down by 1, which means it was pretty much a strip. Then afterwards, you will also push yourself by 30%, which means you do have a good chance of getting the next turn. And on that next turn, you can use the S3, which is a blind and an unbuffable. They may not be as devastating as a defense break, but they are still very good debuffs. Politis being only one of 2 heroes who can capitalize on the enemy using a non-attack skill, it will force your opponent to play very carefully, especially if they have a Soul Weaver. And even if they are carefully watching the way they play, you can activate your own Politis' S2 depending on who your enemy drafts. Because heroes like Elena, AOL, and Senya have passives that will actually proc your own Politis' S2, so if you force them to proc that passive, it will proc your Politis' passive as well. And because Politis is a mage, you can really mess him up depending on what artifact you use, such as an Abyssal Crown, a Violin, a Sierra Wren. There are many ways you can play with Politis. So now those are her strengths, but what are her weaknesses? Even though Politis is a very strong hero when drafted into the correct opponent, she is still quite a niche hero, so when you do not draft her correctly, she is not very useful at all. When the enemy does not have a non-attack skill for you to capitalize on with your S2, she becomes quite weak, and especially if they do not have a CR push either, she becomes nearly useless. Even though her S1 does have a stun and her S3 has debuffs, you are losing a significant portion of her kit. And now you do have to remember that Tranquility does not strip, it reduces a buff duration, which means that if they have a 2-turn immunity, you are not going to be able to strip it. Instead, it will just reduce that by 1. And now as a fire hero, she does not do very well against, well, ice heroes, because they are going to wreck her face. And not only that, her S2 and her S3 and even her S1 are not going to have a very good chance to be able to do what it needs to do to them. She does not have much survivability built into her kit, so she can get sniped by the likes of like Luna, a Chloe, a Kisei, a Karen, because those are all ice heroes. But even then, you still have other heroes that can make short work of her quite easily. Some notable counters I would say is SSB, Rem, Cerise, Ada, and Zeratul. And SSB is going to take advantage of her S2 hitting everybody on your team as well as her S3. And her being iced, she's going to be hard to debuff as well, so she is going to just throw a ton of fans at you all the time. The Rem is kind of the same, especially with her horn. You are not going to be able to stun her or debuff her at all. And a Cerise does have a restrict, which means that she is not going to be able to push up her own CR. Then an Ada is going to be able to strip her, stun her, and do whatever else she needs to do, and especially Zeratul, because he's going to return those debuffs from the S3. So where do we use Politis? Sadly, she is not very good in any PvE scenario, but you know what? That is perfectly fine, because she is so freaking strong in PvP. In arena offense, defense, guild war offense, defense, and world arena, you can use her anywhere as long as you want to. In arena defense, she is very dominant there because she prevents the enemy from going in and being able to completely cleave your arena defense. Like I said before, she will punish an Oxlot, an Amelia, or any kind of pusher and just completely disrupt the cleave. In guild war defense, however, she is not as good as arena defense, but she is still definitely usable. Because you only have 3 slots to put heroes in, people will not prioritize putting a Politis in guild war defense. In arena and guild war offense, she is more of a reactionary pull. If you see an opportunity to use her, you definitely can. Then in world arena, she does very very well, especially with how prominent AOL, Meg Chloe, G Purgus, RB, Violet, and all of them are in the meta right now. She is not a direct counter to them, but she definitely works very well against them. And depending on how you decide to gear Politis, she can be very devastating in more ways than one. So let's take a look at how we can build Politis. So the first build I do recommend is a speed utility build. You can put her on a speed set. I do recommend immunity, but if you cannot, then you can go with a hit set. You want to concentrate a lot of your stats into the speed. You want to hit a decent speed because then you are able to cut. If you are not fast enough, you are not going to be able to cut in and disrupt the enemy. You do want a decent amount of health and defense as well because, well, you want to stay alive. Then you do want effectiveness because if you are unable to reduce that buff duration and you are unable to land a stun or the S3, then she is pretty much going to be useless to you. And as for artifacts, I do recommend Abyssal Crown. I do think it is the strongest one because I really like the stuns. But if you think that the low proc rate is a little too RNG for you, you can go with a Siri Ren that also lands debuffs, and there is a sleep which can disable them. Though I would also highly recommend a Violin because you do get an extra strip from that, which is also very good. Then an alternative to that, you can go with Tag Hells. You do get the extra souls. You can use it on her or you can use it on someone else. And another interesting one is Calamity because you do provide the crit chance to the rest of your team. And not only that, you do boost your own effectiveness, which will help you land the S2 and also land the debuffs from the S1 and the S3. And now the next build is quite interesting because it is a Cleaver build. It is quite unconventional, but when it works, it really freaking works. Because of her S2 passive, she can cut in between and do a lot of damage if you gear her with a lot of damage. And then not only that, she will push her CR and be able to use the S3 to have a very good chance of finishing off some of the squishier heroes. So for this, you are going to go with a DPS setup, a decent amount of attack, crit damage, and crit chance. But not only that, you do need speed because you have to be able to cut in with your S3 to be able to finish them off. If you do not stack enough speed to cut in after the S2, I feel that she is not going to be as effective, but even then she is still going to be quite strong because you were already able to land some damage with the S2. Though again, if you are able to do an S2 into the S3, it is going to be very freaking satisfying. So for this build, the artifacts I do recommend is Symbol of Unity. It is hands down one of the best DPS artifacts out there. But the problem is that you only have one, so you do have to be quite picky on who you decide to use it on. I do consider Portrait of Saviors quite interchangeable with Symbol of Unity because it is just used for raw damage. Then here is a forgotten artifact, which is Last Tea Time. Last Tea Time does enable you to do more damage on AoE skills, so it is definitely usable on a cleaving Politis. I also threw in a Caladra. Of course, you are unable to S2 into S3 with the increased damage from Caladra because the S2 does not really land any debuffs, it simply reduces the turn duration of buffs on the other team. But if you have other debuffs on your team, it could work. Her S3 does land debuffs as well, so if you proc your S3 before you actually use your S2, then it will proc the Caladra for extra damage. Then the rest of the artifacts are pretty much the same ones from last time because they are just solid artifacts all around that they can be used on a DPS Politis as well. So now my final thoughts on Politis. Is she any good? Well, let's take a look. Her PvE performance I think is pretty much nothing because she is not usable anywhere. Her PvP, again, I mentioned it is very good, and while it shows here, I do think she is very good in Arena and World Arena. She is not so good in Guild Wars. She is usable if you want to use her, but she is definitely not one of the top tier units in Guild Wars. The ROI on Politis I feel is very good. She does not take a lot of molas for her to be functional. Unless you want to use her as a Cleaver Politis, then of course you are going to have to push in more molas just for her to do more damage. But if you are using her as just a utility Politis, she only takes 12 molas to reach maximum efficiency. For the gear quality, I did rate it quite low because she does not need very good gear at all for her to work. A lot of people using a speed utility Politis simply throw leftover gear on her and she works perfectly fine as long as she's fast enough with some effectiveness, kinda tanky. She'll do the job, no problem. If you are going for a Cleaver Politis, of course, you are going to need a lot better gear depending on how much damage you actually plan to do. Now, the emotional investment. Do you want to emotionally invest in Politis? I would say is definitely a good choice because of her skill set. That S2 passive is so good, it will always be in the meta. People are not going to all of a sudden not have CR pushers. People are all of a sudden not going to have non-attack skills. Soul Weavers are always going to exist. She will always be relevant because of that. So if you decide to invest in her, the chances of you regretting it are going to be quite low. And now finally, the waifu rating. Is she waifu? As for the appearance, I think it's not too bad. She's nothing too exciting though. A little boring in my opinion, but not bad. As for the personality, she's nothing special to me. There's nothing that stands out. There's nothing that makes me hate her a ton, but nothing that makes me really like her either. Which brings me to the final conclusion of would I even put a ring on it? Probably not, dude. She's got 2 babies with her. Not a big fan of that. No. So now finally, is she worth the pull? Yes, of course yes. Even though she is useless in PvE, she is so strong in PvP, and again, as I mentioned before, she is always going to be relevant, which means that you can always use her. She is always going to be someone that you want on your roster to be able to be picked when you need her, and when you do pick her, she will probably not let you down. If you want more guides like this, feel free to take a look at the playlist right over there, or if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below or join the Discord and we'll try to help you out. But I hope you guys enjoyed this. If you did, please like and subscribe. Thank you for hanging out with us, and I'll see you guys next time, man. Bye.